Welcome to The Explainer. For decades, some of the most brilliant minds on the planet have been slamming particles together at near light speed, poring over incredibly complex equations, all trying to answer one notoriously difficult question. Where exactly does physics end and ultimate reality begin? Mapping that boundary is literally one of the most frustrating yet awe-inspiring challenges in modern science. Today, we're taking a deep dive into a highly theoretical, completely mind-bending text that attempts to do exactly that. It's called the Symmetrical ADI Quantum Gravity Theorem manuscript. Whether you're a physicist, a philosopher, or just someone who loves grappling with the biggest existential mysteries out there, this is going to be an incredibly stimulating ride. We aren't looking at this text to endorse its claims as absolute, objective facts, but rather we're exploring it as a brilliant, wildly intricate spatial map. It's a text that uses heavy mathematical logic to define exactly where human science is fundamentally trapped and where ultimate reality actually starts.
So, here's our roadmap for today. We'll quickly cover the illusion of finality, map out two distinct shells of reality, and see why certain boundaries are completely unreachable. Then we'll look at how this framework actually demotes quantum gravity, explore this fascinating idea of a creator's external map, and wrap up with how science is relativized, rather than rejected.
All right, part one, the illusion of finality. Let's talk about human nature for a second. There is this universal, deep-seated drive in all of us to reach the absolute limits of understanding. Think about how kids constantly ask the question why, over and over again until their parents just completely run out of answers. Well, that doesn't just go away when we grow up, it simply scales up. That exact same instinct is why we build multi-billion-dollar particle colliders today. We desperately want to climb to the absolute top of theological perfection, or dig down to the absolute bottom of physical reality, to find the true floor. We're totally obsessed with finding the final answer.
Which brings us to the big, foundational question that sets up the central problem of this whole manuscript. Can science actually find the absolute floor of reality? If we build a big enough particle accelerator, or if we write a perfectly elegant string theory equation, are we eventually going to hit the true bedrock of existence?
Well, according to the manuscript, if we think we can, we are falling headfirst into a massive trap. The crucial concept here is something called false closure. Basically, false closure is the error of mistaking an internal, created model or a mathematical structure for ultimate, absolute reality. Imagine you're studying a beautifully detailed map of the ocean. You can memorize every single depth chart and every ocean current, but no matter how hard you study that piece of paper, it is never, ever going to get you wet, right? Brilliant physicists can easily fall into this trap because their math is so incredibly beautiful and so powerfully predictive that they forget it's just a representation. It's the mistake of assuming our deepest physics equations actually are the ultimate reality rather than just our best map of it.
Moving right along to part two, two shells of reality. To keep us from making that exact mistake of false closure, the author brings out some heavy architectural blueprints. This is where the framework builds a literal spatial map of all existence. Notice the stark contrast between these two fundamental domains. On one hand, you've got domain D. This is the inner shell. It contains absolutely everything that is created, structured, representable, and intelligible. Physics, mathematics, your consciousness, computer simulations, all of it lives right here in domain D. On the completely opposite side is domain G, the outer shell. This is the divine, the unrepresentable absolute source. Now, it's super important to grasp that domain G isn't just the largest object inside domain D, not at all. It's an absolutely different category of existence entirely. It's an encompassing reality that exists totally beyond every created structure.
And you can really see how this all stacks up right here. Look at how this hierarchy separates the layers of reality. At the very bottom, we have our observable universe, our empirical, day-to-day reality. That universe is nested inside a wider, structured heaven. Now, in this specific text, heaven isn't some mystical, cloudy realm with harps. It's a literal structural extension of our universe, operating on different mathematical curvature laws, but it's still 100% a created thing. Both the universe and heaven sit locked tightly inside that massive enclosure of domain D. And encompassing all of that, serving as the ultimate unapproachable outer shell, is domain G.
Okay, part three, the unreachable boundaries. Let's move a bit deeper and see how this builds into an inescapable ceiling and floor. Because the core argument here is that domain D is a sealed environment. No matter how hard you try, you are completely locked in. You literally cannot break out of domain D from the inside.
The framework outlines what it calls a downward escape route. Imagine a physicist aggressively digging down to find the absolute floor of reality. First, they pass classical physics. They dig deeper and hit the bizarre, microscopic rules of quantum mechanics. Desperate for the bottom, they go even deeper, trying to mathematically model a state of absolute nothingness, a null state formalization. But here's the massive paradox the manuscript points out. Mathematically modeling nothingness requires a model. A theory of nothingness is still a theory. It is still structure. Therefore, it is still firmly trapped inside domain D. You haven't escaped at all.
So the manuscript argues for a strict symmetry across what it calls a bidirectional boundary. Think of it like this. You literally cannot build a ladder high enough to climb into the divine, and you can't dig a hole deep enough to fall into it. Scaling up our intelligence or our theology doesn't magically turn us into a deity. We can't reach the divine ceiling. And digging down into quantum vacuums or fundamental strings doesn't reach the absolute divine nothingness either. We can't reach the divine floor. Domain D is absolutely completely sealed on both ends.
To back this up, the author introduces a formal mathematical tool called the Universal Boundary Operator, denoted as B. Let me give you an analogy for how this works. Think of the largest, most incomprehensibly massive number you can possibly imagine in your head. Got it? Now, divide that number by true, absolute infinity. What's the result? It's 0, every time. That is exactly what operator B does. It evaluates internal structures against the absolute infinity of domain G. A mountain, a galaxy, or even a profoundly complex quantum equation, sure, they aren't worthless internally, but under absolute comparison with the divine source, their value collapses straight to 0. It essentially proves mathematically that internal profundity never, ever equals divinity. Which leads us to part 4, demoting quantum gravity. If we are permanently stuck inside domain D, what does that mean for the absolute holy grail of modern physics, quantum gravity? Where does the ultimate theory of everything actually fit into all of this?
Take a look at this lower null hierarchy from top to bottom. You start up top with ordinary macroscopic structure. Beneath that sits quantum gravity. But look what sits below it. According to the text, quantum gravity isn't the absolute floor. It's just an intermediate layer sitting above even deeper, purely mathematical states of structural emptiness, things termed alpha 0, omega 0, and absolute spatio-temporal 0. The shock value here is immense. The ultimate goal of modern physicists, quantum gravity, is not the basement of reality. It's just a lower floor in the building.
So, if it's not the bottom, what is it then? The author formally demotes quantum gravity, classifying it simply as curvature syntax. I absolutely love this concept. Imagine studying the grammar of the English language. You can master every single rule of syntax perfectly, but knowing the grammar will never tell you who actually invented the language or why they decided to speak it in the first place. That's what quantum gravity is to this manuscript. It is just the mathematical grammar by which spacetime curvature is formalized. It describes how spacetime curves at the deepest levels, but it is completely incapable of explaining why created spacetime exists at all. Syntax is never the source.
Part 5. The creator's external map. So, if we are completely trapped inside the grammar, how do we ever get the dictionary? If we can't logic or calculate our way out of this structural shell of domain D, how do we know what lies beyond it?
The framework uses a phenomenal video game analogy to explain this. Think of characters running around inside a digital world. They can study the physics engine of their game all they want. They can even locate the deepest lines of underlying code inside their world. But analyzing the game's code will never ever reveal the game developer's physical reality. There is literally no line of code that explains what the programmer had for lunch or why they built the game in the first place. The characters inside need an external map. They need direct communication from the developer dropped into the simulation from the outside.
And this is where the manuscript takes a really fascinating interdisciplinary leap, merging formal mathematical ontology with Islamic cosmology. It takes the devotional phrase Allahu Akbar, meaning God is greater, and strips it of mere mystical feeling. Instead, it turns it into a hard, literal, geometric boundary axiom. It mathematically formalizes the idea that the absolute source is fundamentally greater than any structure, any physics equation, or any simulated reality within domain D. It is a strict boundary ensuring the simulation can never, under any circumstances, encompass the simulator.
And check this out. The text makes another incredibly bold claim. Take a second and just look around you right now. You are freely moving through 3 spatial dimensions, and you are being carried forward through 1 dimension of time. The manuscript argues that our 3 + 1 dimensional universe isn't some random cosmic accident. It is mathematically optimal for one specific profound purpose. It provides the exact cognitive bandwidth required for created beings to achieve self-awareness, to do science, and to recognize these exact boundaries.
We exist in 3+1 dimensions precisely, so we have the capacity to figure out that we are, in fact, inside domain D.
Finally, Part 6, Science Relativized, Not Rejected. As we wrap up this explainer, we really have to look at what this entire framework means for the future of theoretical physics. And I want to set a reassuring tone here, because this is absolutely not an attack on the scientific method.
The manuscript draws a crystal-clear line of jurisdiction, contrasting these two tools perfectly. Science is an incredibly powerful microscope, but its jurisdiction is strictly internal. It is the perfect tool for mapping the internal code, the laws, and the syntax of domain D. Revelation, on the other hand, acts as the letter from the programmer. It provides the boundary conditions and ultimate origins that the internal code could simply never deduce on its own. Confusing these two tools, like using a microscope to try and read a letter from outside the universe, well, that's exactly where humanity gets into trouble.
So, physics is relativized. And honestly, this is a deeply liberating concept. Physics reaches its proper excellence when it describes created structure perfectly, figuring out exactly how quantum gravity works without falling into false closure and pretending to be the creator of that structure. It frees physicists up from the immense burden of trying to be philosophers or theologians. They can simply be excellent at mapping the internal structure, letting science do exactly what it was designed to do.
Which leaves us with a truly mind-expanding perspective. Think about the greatest scientific endeavors of our time. The massive colliders, the supercomputers, the lifelong pursuits of genius physicists. If our deepest mathematical equations, the very bedrock of quantum gravity, are just the internal syntax of a created shell, what are we really trying to calculate? Are we genuinely looking for the foundation of reality, or are we just reading the grammar of a language we didn't invent? Ponder that the next time you look up at the stars. Thanks for joining this explainer. Keep questioning everything, and we'll see you next time.